Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Enablement Squad webinar, How to Prioritize an Enablement. I have a note for myself that says, make sure you're recording. So um, it's in red. It's bolded in red.
I'm sure one of the 14 note takers have it under
Yeah.
control.
Yes. Send me this, y'all. Thank you. So just a quick intro. What is the Enablement Squad? We are the largest open community of enablement professionals, and our mission is to engage, educate, and empower enablement professionals across industry and the globe. My name is Karina Escaño, and I'm on the events team. And I work usually with like webinars and other events through the Enablement Squad. Just a shameless plug, please join us on Slack if you haven't already. If you just go to our website, enablementsquad.com, you'll be able to join us from there. And we have a very lively Slack, so many different channels that you can join, many different topics that I think as an enabler or enabler adjacent, or hopefully want to be an enabler, you will definitely appreciate. Let's get to it. All right. So today we have two people with us, Stephanie Middaugh and Nina LaRouche. And what we're going to talk about is how to prioritize enablement that drives results. And I'm sorry, I just keep admitting people from the. Okay, just want to make sure everyone is good. Yes. Okay. Two more. Perfect. Um, I will I will pass it on to them so they can just do a little quick intro and we'll get straight into it. And Stephanie, can you kick us off, please?
Sure. Yeah. Hi everybody. I see so many familiar faces, so I love seeing and little pictures. So no worries if y'all are off camera. Stephanie Middaugh, and I am one of the original co-founders of the Enablement Squad. So this really does kind of fill my enablement heart quite a bit to see so many people in here. I've been in enablement too long, folks. Well over a decade at this point. And yeah, I'm excited to dive in and share some best practices. I always mess these up as far as about me, but I'm an open book. If you want to know anything else, just ask me. Nina, over to you. You could do a better job of your intro than I did.
Oh, well, I doubt that. But Nina LaRouche, based in Indianapolis. Stephanie and I have known each other for probably a good portion of that decade.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I have been in the enablement space also over a decade. Prior to that, was a seller myself for about 15 years, and started my career as a teacher in the classroom, teaching physics. So, if you look really carefully, you might still see some physics books on my bookshelf, just in case I ever need to pull one of those out. So, super happy to be here. And yeah, let's jump in.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, so prioritizing enablement that drives results. Please let us know a little bit about this topic, why we even chose this topic, and just your expertise.
Stephanie, you want to kick us
Yeah.
off?
Yeah. I mean, if you've been in enablement for even like a week, you're aware of all of the crazy requests that come our way. Just spin up a training and just send out this, can we get another battle card? And our reps need this and our reps need that. And that's just the one-off requests that come through, in addition to the we're not closing deals fast enough and we need to see uptick in pipeline gen and we need to see higher close rates against our competitors and whatever. So whether you're a team of one, mighty team of one, or you're a team of 50, guarantee this topic, this issue is probably kind of come up. And this is something that Nina and I, through our careers, have definitely navigated. I will not say perfected, because there is no such thing as perfecting this, but we definitely have some tips and tricks. And I know this is something that a lot of people deal with on a pretty regular basis. So we're going to share some of the things that we've picked up along the way. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, raise your hand. We'll have a Q&A at the very end as well. And we're going to share some frameworks and all of the things. So yeah, Nina, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think our goal really is for you to just, walk away from this with, maybe one key idea or something that you can implement to make this prioritization thing just a tiny bit easier. As Stephanie said, there's no perfect way to navigate this. There's a lot of complexity to it, but yeah, love that we're talking about this because it is probably the biggest challenge that we face every day. So.
Exactly. And I just want to call out this is being recorded, and we will have like a blog post with some just key takeaways after this webinar, like in a week or so. So if you miss anything or you have to drop off early, don't worry, we'll got you covered. Let's get into it. So right here in the agenda, we are going to do why prioritization matters, excuse me. We're going to talk a little bit about building a prioritization framework. And then, as Stephanie mentioned, there's going to be some time at the end for Q&A. So please ask your questions. Even if you add them in the chat, we'll get to them at the end. But we definitely have some time to go through your questions.
Awesome. All right. So I think, fundamentally, we all probably know how to prioritize, how to make a list. I mean, we've been doing this our whole lives, not just in enablement, but in our family lives and everywhere else, right? But I think the challenge specifically to enablement is that enablement often is the only function that actually sees the full load of everything that's coming at the reps. And I actually did a series on this in LinkedIn a few weeks back, but everything lands on the reps plate. If legal's asking for us to do something because the MSA just changed, we have to get ready for sales kickoff. There's an onboarding redesign that's happening. A new product is launching, or a new feature, or a new competitor has come up, in the ranks that we need to tackle. All of these things, comp changes, methodology, like all of this stuff is falling on the reps' plates. And as Stephanie said, that doesn't even count the stuff that we're noticing, right? Deals are getting stuck in stage 2, and how do we address that? And so all of these things are, kind of whether they're coming in through a request, whether we're noticing them, whether a stakeholder is asking for it, every single ask, regardless of whether it's coming from the CRO, our stakeholders, or our own observations, is something that feels important and feels urgent, right? And so, I, for one, having been in a seller's shoes, I'm fiercely protective of reps' time. I think the worst thing that we can do is ask them to spend time in learning and it not be super impactful, super meaningful to them, because one, we lose credibility and trust, and two, we've just wasted their time when they could have been in front of clients, right? And so it's really important for us to get this right. And the reality is that our job, having that context of all of the things, is really important and really critical to bring to the table as the enablement function leader or whatever, right? When we don't get this right, you can see I mean, these numbers are sort of made up numbers, but you can see quality comes down, right? If we're doing too much, the quality of the things that we're doing is going to be less, right? We're more apt to miss deadlines or push deadlines out. Our team, if we have a team, or if you're a team of one, burnout is going to skyrocket, right? Because we're just trying to do too much at the same time. And then, like I said before, stakeholder trust starts to go down. And ultimately, we're not driving the impact that we should be, right? And so that is why this is such an important topic and why we really have to get this right. So, Stephanie, I'll pass it to you for the next slide.
One thing too, to touch on the saying yes to everything. I think most people get into enablement because we enjoy helping people, we enjoy giving back, we enjoy supporting. It's really easy. Early on in my enablement career, I thought that's what I needed to. I needed to say yes. I needed to people please. I needed to this is where I get a lot of kind of my love language is just being yes, I want to be helpful and I want to do the things and whatever. And honestly, one of the most helpful things that you can do for the organization, we'll touch on this a little bit later, is saying like no or not yet, or asking questions and pushing back of like, why is that a priority right now? Or why are we thinking about that? And we'll chat through ways that you can kind of approach this, but it's really easy, especially for like young enablement professionals. I've been there, I've been in those shoes of just like, of course I can help. Of course I can. Yes, absolutely. Like I want to help you and I want to do the things. And then all of a sudden you've got a long list of things that are, important or top priority or whatever. And then all of a sudden when it becomes review time, or if you're getting feedback from your leader and they're like, okay, what have you done? And you're like, I did all of the things. I did everything everybody asked me to do. And then they're like, what impact did that actually have on the business? And you're like, I was being helpful. Like that was the impact that I was having. So like this is one of those things that will kind of like continue this steel thread throughout this entire conversation, as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do think, especially enablement professionals, like we are helpers at
Yeah.
heart. And so it's really easy to fall into that, is that wanting to say yes. But
Yeah.
I think it's the important thing is just like, of course, we want to be helpful, we want to say yes, but like that pause. And we'll talk about some of that through the frameworks. So,
Helpful, but make it strategic.
yeah.
So one thing here too that I think is important to call out, and this is again leads into kind of the saying yes to everything, especially those little things that like nip at your heels of just like we need a new slide deck, or we need a new this, or we need a like whatever. Content existing in the world doesn't necessarily mean that learning is actually taking place, that behavior change is actually taking place, that the application is actually taking place. This is an important thing to kind of call out in the world that we are in right now of just like, we'll just have Claude or ChatGPT pull together, like pump out a new battle card or like whatever, and you throw it at the reps and you're like, here you go, use it. Because that's what product marketing said that they needed, or whatever it is. Just because that content is existing doesn't mean that the learning and the application, the behavior change is actually taking place. And I think this is an important call out here too, from a prioritization standpoint of like, I can create the content, but what are we actually doing with that stuff? What is it feeding into? What is it impacting? What is it, you know, doing for the entire business, for the reps, to Nina's point of just like, are we literally just like fire hosing them with a bunch of stuff, or are we actually making an impact and trying to, dare I say, move the needle on certain things? And I think this is an important kind of like call out on this front. Nina, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I know we chatted about this as we were sort of preparing. I actually have a rule. When I joined an organization, when I was leading the last team that I led at my last organization, I don't allow people to use the word no in their learning objectives for this very reason, because knowing something is not the same as being able to do something, right? Um, I have a lot of books on my bookshelf. That does not mean I have applied every principle or best practice or whatever that I have read about, right? I love to use the analogy of, like fitness, health, right? Like I know that I need to eat less ice cream. I know that I need to like get more
Same.
steps in. Fundamentally, I know that, but until I actually do it, then it's not going to like make a difference, right? It's not going to make an impact. So like knowing and doing are different. And Stephanie and I were talking about, I have the best example. I know probably other organizations out there have done like those like Forrester reports, right? We had a CMO at my last company that like we did one of those like really big reports. And of course it's great information. Like we want our customers to have this information. But like there was an ask to enable the team on the Forrester report. And I'm kind of thinking like, okay, it's a report. Like it's a document. Like what is the do? What do we want them to do differently? Well, we want them to read it. How do we measure that? Like reading something is not the same as doing something, right? And so thinking about it through that lens I think can be really helpful. And that's why I banned the word no from learning objectives, because I don't really care what you know. What I care about is what they can do, right? So,
I'm here
Well,
taking notes, and that's what I just wrote. Ban the word no from our learning objective. So thank you.
cool. I think we're going to talk about some frameworks next.
yes.
Awesome. Cool. Well, probably you are familiar with this type of a framework. So, Eisenhower framework, I think, is a common one. Really, as enablement, we need to think about what is the potential impact, right, from a revenue standpoint. Like, is this going to drive higher revenue, higher win rates, faster deal cycles? Like, what is the actual impact that this has a potential of impacting? Impacting, sorry, too many words of impact. And then what is this going to take from an effort standpoint, right? And some of this comes back to, again, that know versus do, right? If we need them to change a major behavior change, right, that's a lot of effort, both on our part in terms of building out the program, but also on the learner's part, right? So thinking about effort both in terms of your team's capacity or your capacity if you're a solo enabler, as well as like what's the potential impact, right? And so like impact can be evaluated in several different ways. Like we think about like, does this ladder up to like an OKR or a strategic priority for the business? Does it, have a significant change behavior, right? Like, does it ladder up to a success metric? If we can't tie it to a success metric, it's probably not going to have a huge impact, right? And then the other thing I would think about is like, what's the magnitude of who needs to make this change? I would often get requests like, this group of sellers needs to be trained on XYZ. Well, that group of sellers was like 10 out of our organization of 300, right? And so like you have to think about those things differently. The other thing, and I'm sure that this comes up for a lot of folks, is you're oftentimes going to have sales leaders come to you and say, we need training on XYZ, right? And the reason they're asking for it is because they just got off a call where something went wrong, right? But that's an isolated incident. And like, so a really good question to ask in that situation is, okay, help me understand, what evidence do we have that this is an actual problem, and how many people is this impacting, right? If you're asking for that evidence, then they have to start to like think about the quantification of it. So, Karina, if you could hit the advance the button. So when you plot these things, and I would literally do this, I would give impact a score of like 1 to 10, 10 being like high impact, and I would give effort a score of 1 to 10. And I would start to plot out like, where do these things sit, right? And so this is a typical prioritization matrix. I don't probably need to go into detail, but like, our focus should be on scheduling those major projects, right? Those are the ones that are proactive. We want to make sure we get those on the calendar. Those are going to take a lot of effort. And so we need to think about capacity, both on the learner side and on the enablement side. And then, of course, tackling those quick wins where you get those, really nice wins where you don't have a ton of effort, but you know that there's going to be some significant impact. And then I don't know, fill-ins typically, I never usually got to fill-ins because we never really had additional capacity, but you can kind of have that bucket or that backlog, right, of activities that if time allows, we can go ahead and do those things. And then, of course, you're going to have to deprioritize some, right? You're going to have to say no, or not yet, or maybe we can tackle this in a different way, right? That Forrester example that I gave earlier, we ended up doing like a little like kind of quiz. Like it would send them 2 questions every week about some of the metrics that were in there. So essentially we didn't say no, but like it was an easy lift for us to be able to do that and say that we had, done something to like help them memorize some of those stats to be able to share in their customer conversations. So that's kind of how you think about like from a framework perspective. I would say the way that this worked for me, like in practice, is I actually would each quarter I would ask my primary stakeholders. So depending on my enterprise leader, my SMB leader, my EMEA leader, etc., I would ask them to provide their top 3 priorities. And then I would take that information and I ask them for what's the behavior change, what's the magnitude of the change, and how will you measure success? So I was getting some of those like qualifiers out there early. And then I would meet with each of them, discuss them in more detail, find out like, why is this not already happening? And then I would take all of those inputs from each of the leaders, plus any requests that we had gotten from like, product marketing or legal or the other teams that are asking. And then anything, of course, that was, proactively identified by us. And I would literally plot those on like a roadmap. And Stephanie's going to share a little bit of a roadmap example later. But that is, you have to have the full context. You have to be able to see everything that's being asked and how much effort it's going to take. And so one thing that I would recommend is when you're doing that is think about, we don't want to take up like 100% of the roadmap because like, I don't know about you all, but I've never worked for an organization where you can plan the whole quarter in advance and nothing ever changes, right? Like things are evolving, things are moving. We had 2 acquisitions like over the course of 4 months that I wasn't anticipating. So like I would set sort of a 60-40 split. 60% is sort of planned in advance, proactive, and then leave 40% to be able to evolve and flex and do some of those things. And the other thing I think that's really helpful is to set a what I called a learning budget. So for me, it was like 5 hours per month per rep. And so I promised to not exceed that amount of ask. And so if you have that and you've agreed to that across your stakeholders, it makes it much easier to say, hey, with all of these asks, we're actually looking at 6, 7, 8 hours of learning. And we can't do that, right? And so it gives you some justification to start to push back and say no. So
nice. Okay. Should we keep going to the next slide?
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
All right. The next thing I want to talk about, this was like an epiphany moment for me when I first started at my previous company. I had been in sales for 15 years. I shared that earlier in the session. And I was kind of trying to teach my new team, like, how do you properly scope an enablement request? Like, what are the things that you need to ask about? And it occurred to me that like we have a process, much like a sales process, and we have qualifiers, much like you would use like a BANT or some other like methodology, right? And so there's really 4 questions that you need to ask as sort of an initial kind of qualification of the request. So the first one is budget. And what I mean by budget isn't necessarily like monetarily budget. Could be if you're using a third party for something, but like capacity wise, do we have budget? Does the enablement team have capacity? Do our learners have the capacity? Do our managers have the capacity to be able to help reinforce, right? What is taking up mind share for our audiences? And then, of course, the second one is authority. So who's the champion? Who is asking for this? And be wary of name dropping. I don't know if this happens to other people, but like the CRO said this is the #1 priority. And I would hear that from like 3 different people the same month, right? Oh, really? Okay. So he's got all of these priorities. So just, there's a little bit of politics that falls in there. So you got to like navigate that carefully. But who's the champion? Where does this rank against all those other priorities? what is the data telling us? So going back to my example of like a sales leader coming out of a call, like they might say that we need help with objection handling, but like you go into Gong and you look at the data and you're like, actually, we're doing a decent job of objection handling. So I don't see that as the primary need, right? And then, of course, we've got need. This one is, does this align to the revenue goals? Is this tied to an OKR? What does success look like? How are we measuring that? What audiences need this, right? Being careful that not every ask needs to go to every person, right? What SDRs need is different than what AEs need, is different than what your sales engineer or solution consultants need. So thinking about it across roles is important. And then, of course, timing. And so, like, how urgent is this? And when I think about this, of course, everybody thinks every ask is the most urgent need. But then thinking from a sequential perspective, is there something else that needs to happen before we tackle this, right? If we do training on this topic, but we haven't fixed the like broken process that makes it really hard, then that training is going to be wasted. So thinking about it from that perspective. Stephanie, anything that you would add here?
I I love this approach. And I think one of the things, the different frameworks that Nina and I have kind of like put together is like each of them kind of work together. They build upon each other. Like you can use different things. And I think one of the areas here that's important is like even just like being honest with your sales leadership of just like, I'm gonna run a little bit of my own like sales process with you here of like I'm walking through like they ideally should understand this approach to things. And I think walking them through and even giving them some insight. I ask a lot of questions. I ask a lot of potentially annoyingly detailed questions. I usually kind of lead with that kind of almost disclaimer, especially when I'm starting a new role or if I'm dealing with a new leader of what or whatever of like, I'm about to ask you or I'm about to drill in with some potentially annoying kind of questions. I promise there's a reason for it. Here's my reason for it. So like even if you're kind of if you're pushing back and like we said we'll kind of like get into strategies for this in a little bit, but like if you're pushing back, if you're saying no or not yet or asking questions, prefacing all of that with the reason why you're asking these questions and pushing back can help kind of keep that door open versus them immediately going on the defensive and being like, well, Steph's being a roadblock and she's not doing the things that we need help with or like whatever it is, making sure that they kind of understand of like, these are the things that I'm going through and like here's why I'm mapping it out based on like impact and like and all of the things. This is why it's happening. That can keep that door open so that you're not immediately kind of like closing them off and they just like disengage automatically. There's a not so much talked about like kind of element of enablement of like psychology of the people that you work with and deal with and train and interact with. Therein lies kind of an element of that of like giving them the heads up of like I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the things and then I'm going to tell you what I did. That feeds into all of this.
Right.
Okay, this one's mine. So one of the things that I kind of uncovered, and the next slide will show you kind of a little bit deeper on this, but one of the companies that I worked for was like I would pretty consistently have this conversation with leadership of just like, well, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And I'd be like, cool, what's the end goal of that? And they'd be like, we need this. And one perfect example was like, Steph, we need to win more deals. And I was like, well, no duh. Like who doesn't? Like, let's be real here. I was like, cool, yes, I'm on board with this. Why that like tell me where is this stemming from? What's going on? And I would get these like blank stares from like executive leadership of just like, we need more money. And I was like, oh, yes, okay, yep, no, I gotcha. But like, what's our ultimate goal here? What are we trying to kind of like get to? And like again, asking almost like I just ran a workshop with some sales reps on this of like asking those five whys of like, why are we doing the things? And this helped me to kind of direct the conversation and then like present kind of what I was able to find as far as like what's the ultimate goal here of like, okay, we're trying to break into a perfect example that I had in a previous life was like, we need to sell into this new persona. Cool. Why do we want to do that? Because we need more money. Okay, cool. But why though? Like, why is this new persona the one? And eventually, after a while, we understand that like the persona that we're selling into isn't quite working the way that we thought it was going to. So we need to sell into this different persona because it's a little bit stickier and they've got access to budget and champion, like all of the things. I was like, great, this is the goal. This is what I can tie my enablement initiative to here at the very top. What are the outcomes now? Making more money and like having more upsell opportunities. That's the outcome. That's not the goal. And then like the metrics to track as a result of that, of like what's going through here. So like when a leader's coming to me, jet set after a call of like, we need to do discovery training. And I'm like, cool, tell me why and what's going on and what's happening. And like all of these that like walking them through kind of even you don't even have to show this, but you can like boil this back up to like, here's what I heard. And this is what kind of the
Mhm.
foundations of an entire enablement initiative can kind of start looking like. So this can be a good, helpful way to start kind of bucketing and asking even the right questions of like, we're stuck in an outcome. We're stuck right here in the middle layer. How can I measure this at the bottom to make sure that I can report back to you that we're achieving this outcome? And then what's your goal? What's the motivating factor here at the top in order to kind of drive all of those things? Um, so that's this one. And then if we can go to, I think it's the next one that I've got. Yes. Okay. So this is actually the document where this stemmed from, and I got it was my very first team of one enablement role where I was too confident in myself and I was like I could totally do this and I stepped into it, and then I was having the same conversation over and over and over again with all of my revenue leaders, and I was like I am banging my head against a wall. So it was a constant kind of deluge of just like stuff we need this and stuff we need that and we need a training for that. We need more of this and like whatever. And it was always Nina, to your point, coming after a meeting. And I was like, I don't know that this is actually a fire drill. Like, spoiler alert, there's no such thing as an enablement emergency, folks. Like, it just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So, what I started doing was I created kind of this template, and I would lovingly tell my leadership of just like I am so excited that you are excited about whatever it is that you're coming to me with right now. But I was like, I actually need to like ask you some deeper questions around like what this is. Some leaders, I actually just like handed this to them and I was like, can you fill this out for me? Even just with like some bullet points or some notes, or I would set up a meeting with them, like depending on the culture of like, are we an async kind of culture? Are we a meeting heavy kind of culture? Let's talk about this. Let's walk it through. But what I found more often than not was that when I started going through these questions of like, what's the problem that we're solving? What's the business impact that's going to take place here? How is this going to help reps be successful? How is success defined for this program? How is this going to be measured? Like some of these are things that I can answer when I've got some of these larger questions, but you start digging, you start removing those layers. All of a sudden, the fire drill of a training is actually like, well, maybe this actually isn't like a priority right now. And I'd be like, I'm so happy that you came to this conclusion with me and we worked through this problem. And there are legitimate kinds of things to Nina's point of just like, is that what the data is actually showing? Like, I God bless them. I had another like leader at one point was just like, our reps are begging for a sales methodology. And I was like, that's not a thing. Reps don't ever never do they never.
False.
Never. And I was like, I have questions. And we dug into it. And sure enough, what was uncovered was that the reps didn't understand the sales process that already kind of existed in a vacuum that RevOps had kind of created by themselves, had never been communicated to the sales team. So what they were begging for was structure, not a methodology. So like, congratulations, team. I saved you $1 million by like not going with Challenger. But like this is where a lot of these like uncovering questions can kind of come from and like bleed into. And let's go to, I know we're popping into our like Q&A time here, so I want to like flash through these. I borrowed this from another brilliant enablement leader years and years ago of like we've probably all seen like the product marketing tiering structure when we've got a new product launch that's coming out of like this is a big kahuna launch, this is like a feature set or whatever. She had translated this basically into an enablement matrix of like what this actually looks like of like tier one, we're talking like a full-blown behavior change. We are shifting, changing, breaking bad habits, creating new ones, creating whole new habits. This is your sales methodology. This is new pricing and packaging. This is new messaging. This is new product, like full-blown, like we're going to platform instead of a feature phone, whatever. This is like the tier one where we need a full-blown enablement initiative. We're talking, you know, all of the things that we could go into. Then you drop down to like a tier three, which is like your Forrester reports that Nina was talking about of like, we need the teams to be enabled and trained on the Forrester report. No, get out of here. This is a newsletter update at best. This is a team conversation. This is something low lift. Absolutely not. We're not doing a training on a like get out of here. Tier two is somewhere kind of like smack dab in the middle between these two. Where like we're kind of supplementing where how teams are working. It's not necessarily like a full-blown behavior change. It's not necessarily just an FYI. This sits somewhere in between. And you guys can use this framework and fill in and adjust kind of what some of these look like. But this was helpful for me as I was dealing with sales leaders or even just revenue leaders in general of like being able to start bucketing your request is a tier one, or you think it's a tier one, your request is actually a tier three, or like what this kind of looks like. And then Nina's impact framework here, this is perfect example of kind of where you can pair this together. And then moving past this and to the next slide is where you can start kind of building out a makeshifty kind of roadmap. One of my last companies I was at, I got asked for it was a hyper growth startup and we had a new CRO come in from like a legacy enterprise company and she was like, I want to see a 6-month roadmap. And I was like, I would love to see a 2-week roadmap out of our teams, but like, all right. So anyway, so I created this roadmap. So like this is like 6 months, but let's be real, this is probably unrealistic. But this is where you can start taking some of those tiers and actually plotting them. Ideal scenario, you really should only have one, maybe two tier one initiatives per quarter. Like, because let's be real, the human brain only has so much capacity. Adults just can't change behavior. They can't learn behaviors. They can't apply new behavior, like all of those things. There's only so much capacity for our audiences. So, like one, maybe two tier one initiatives in a quarter. And then you kind of see, like, here, as far as like the color coding goes, where things fall into like a sales enablement bucket or a technical enablement bucket, what those months are, where do the GTM events kind of like fall into all of this. This is like a good kind of map. And again, if you can just do like a quarter, fantastic. And to Nina's point, making sure that you're leaving room here to be flexible with the business. I think this is one of the important pieces. I actually like wrote a book on this as far as like the enablement maturity model of like making sure that you are doing what you need to in order to put structure around the initiative and making sure that you are not wasting people's time and doing, just kind of, treading water kind of activities while also staying flexible enough to the type of business that you're in. As a team of one at a hypergrowth startup, am I going to be able to achieve a 90% proactive kind of enablement road? No, no, just like don't put yourself through that stress. I've done it. It's not great. Like, don't try to like shove a square peg in a round hole. But these can be really great little stepping stones where you can be like, I'm going to put a little bit of strategy in here and I'm going to leave some of these other pieces open, or I'm going to drop this in here. Maybe your tier one kind of initiative here is like a skill development, whatever it could be. But this is one of the important pieces. I know I'm talking really fast because I want to make sure that we're leaving time for like Q&A at the end. So let's move forward to kind of this last slide. And I'll let you kick off on this one.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I love the slide that Stephanie had with roadmap. I've done similar examples. Like, I think you're going to pull in a lot of things like tiering. You can pull in like that learner budget we talked about. I think it's the visualization of that that is really helpful for stakeholders to see, like, that was a busy slide. Like, this is what you're asking us for. Like, keep in mind, like, this is the capacity it's going to take, right? You might break it out by role or by delivery format. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of visualize it. But so let's talk about, because eventually we are going to have to push back. We're going to have to say no, or we're going to have to say not yet, right? So we've covered a lot of these things already. Use some kind of intake process, scoping, like, Stephanie shared a really great example with her kind of program overview, something that helps you gather some of that information. The other thing is, like, get leaders to triage with you. And this is where I would recommend that you have some type of, whether it's like a steering co or an enablement council or something, where you have some representatives from across the business that help you kind of get a better sense of, like, how critical is this, right? For me, I had a group of frontline leaders across each segment of the business that we met. We started meeting like biweekly, and then it became more of an asynchronous once we got into a groove. And so they would help me sort of triage things as they came in, which was super helpful. When you say not yet, make sure you give them some type of timeline, right? Like, clear is kind. So don't overpromise. Don't just, hope they forget. Like, let's, make sure that we're being credible and upfront with that. If you're making trade-offs, if you're saying, like, okay, I get it, this is important, what's going to come off of the plate, make sure that those are visible and that they're documented, right? And that's just, I don't know about you all, but I can't remember what happened yesterday. So I'm definitely not going to remember that we had this conversation last quarter and I told you no, right? So make sure that you're documenting. And then on the right side are just some examples of, like, how you can come to those conversations, right? At the end of the day, we are here to serve the business. We are here to drive results for the business. And so, like, making it really clear that you are on their side, you want to drive the results that they want. You just may have a different path to get there, right? And so, like, helping them understand that learning doesn't happen. I wish it was like the Matrix, where you could, like, plug someone in and suddenly they know how to fly a helicopter. That's just not how learning works, right? And so you have to help them understand that learning takes time, and these are the things that we need to consider. So, and I think, excuse me, I think we're ready for Q&A. And sorry, we took a little longer than we expected, but hopefully you've gathered some, good tips and best practices that you can take into your world. So
Amazing. Well, actually, it was all great information, so please don't apologize. I don't know if you saw me. I was here writing notes, old school way. So many great things that I took away. I'm just checking the chat quickly to see if there were any questions. Oh, it was very active. I love that. Yes. I'm just trying to see if there are any questions. And then if not, please add your questions here.
I had a question that came in kind of on like a private like DM or whatever, asking around like the loudest voice in the room, especially from like a revenue leader, of like they're kind of the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of a situation, and how do you handle kind of that loudest leader who may or may not have kind of the entire organization's best interest. Maybe it's Nina, to your point earlier, of just like, well, this is like 10 people out of like the several hundred that we're kind of supporting. And I think this bodes into, we touched on a little bit of like the psychology and even like a little bit of the political kind of elements of the roles that we find ourselves in, of like having to delicately balance, dare I say, egos. I don't know if anybody else has run into revenue or sales leaders that have like some ego attached to them. Every once in a while,
Every once in a while.
every so often it comes up. But like these are some of those important things to just kind of like, sometimes what I found psychologically from like these leaders that are like really loud, really demanding, or like whatever, is like meeting with them to really understand, one, do they understand what enablement is and should be? Have you kind of defined that for them, for the entire leadership team of like what they can actually realistically expect from you and or your team? Two, sometimes what I found too is that like they're used to not being listened to, or they are not being listened to by either their reps or their executive leadership above them. So they are yelling into the void, and unfortunately, enablement sometimes lives in that void.
Mhm.
So like we are the ones that we will listen to them. We give them the time. They may not be getting that anywhere else in the business. So we end up kind of being that at the bottom of the hill for them. Sometimes all they need to do is be heard. Sometimes they're asking, and this is where that kind of like delicate psychological kind of stuff can come into play. And again, like not necessarily saying yes to everything or like pushing back on them, but making sure that you're kind of providing a safe space for them to vent to. Maybe they are legitimately just looking to vent. My my husband started taking this approach with me of just like, do you want me to solve this for you, or are you just looking for a vent? And I was like, just shut your mouth. I just need to vent. Like this is all I need. That might legitimately be what they need as well, of just like, I just want to vent, or I'm looking to just kind of like get it out, and I can't tell it to my team and I can't tell it to my executive. So like you end up kind of being that punching bag a little bit. Like don't like set boundaries as much as you can, for sure, because those are wildly important. But dig in a little bit deeper, lead with curiosity from that perspective, and understand sometimes you're just going to run into terrible leaders that ask too much. Their expectations are wildly off base. And sometimes like you just kind of have to like let them go on their own little ice flow and like scream into their void a little bit, but like try to understand them. Lean in with kindness and curiosity at first. Sometimes you do have to like kind of cut that tie. One of the best things that I've ever heard beginning of my career was from Siobhan Thatcher, and it was like, I'm responsible to you, not for you.
Mm.
And I lead with that like in every element of like my enablement life in general. And like sometimes you do have to lean into that with leaders who are maybe a little bit too much. But Nina, curious as far as like if you have any points there as well.
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's, it is a delicate conversation, and you do have to, you want to get alignment. You want to preserve the relationship, um, and so that can be hard. Like that's just like human beings are complex people, right? And so like I think as much as you can listen, be curious, as she said, but then ultimately, like, consider all of the data in front of you, I think is what is really going to make the difference. I also had a question that came in through my chat, and it's really around how do you how do you balance that enablement often becomes like the catch-all for everything? Like I'm sure you've all heard, enablement is the fixer of broken things. No, actually, we're not. Right? That is not our job. I think this comes down to, again, if we can get really, really crystal clear on what is the behavior. I would often ask, what is it that we want them to do or say that's different than today? And that question often helps those requesters kind of get to what they're trying to do a little bit faster, because they have a really hard time, as Stephanie talked about, like the outcome, the goal, the outcome, and the success metrics, right? They have a really hard time bridging the gap between what they want to happen from a revenue standpoint with what is the behavior that needs to change. If you can get really, really clear on the behavior, and then the second question I ask is, okay, why are they not doing it today? Is it that they don't know how to do it? Usually that's not actually the problem, right? And so we have to start to dig. Is it because something else is broken? Is it because there's a process that's challenging? A tool is not working the way it should? Is it, I mean, it could be a number of things. It could be, I've had situations where like the compensation model that you have in place is not incentivizing the behavior that you want to drive. And so I can train all day long on this product, but until reps are getting paid to sell the product, it's not gonna fix it, right? And so a book, I actually keep it right here because it's so helpful. A book I would recommend is called Map It by Kathy Moore. And it has a really, really strong framework for how you take that behavior and then start to like uncover the why is this not happening today? Because it
Mm.
could be motivational, it could be process oriented, it could be, it could be a number of things. If it's knowledge or skill, then that's where an enablement program makes sense, right? But if it's something else, we're still going to help. We're still going to like bring that to the attention of RevOps or whoever owns that thing. So it is our job to like diagnose and then figure out like who actually owns it, right?
Amazing. I think we have time for just like one more question. And then what I was thinking is I can go through the chat, and when we do like the key takeaways, we can also answer those questions. What do you think? Are you up for one more question?
Sure.
Yeah. I saw two
Amazing.
questions that we might be able to like squeeze together as far as like
Oh,
intake process and then prioritizing when you support kind of multiple departments. I think
perfect.
those two things kind of like squish together.
That's what I was looking
Yeah.
at.
As far as like intake process goes, this one is an interesting one in that like my process oriented brain immediately goes to like an Asana intake, like an intake form in some Google,
Mhm.
Asana, Monday, whatever your like thing of choice is. Therein lies kind of the fun wiggly area of just like, well, I'm going to get nothing but requests for these little one-off kind of things here or there, which is not maybe super great. If you're dealing with like a what I would consider like, and I say this with all love, immature enablement function, that might be a good way to kind of triage things right from the get-go and understand what types of requests are coming in, where are things kind of happening, who's asking for the most, what's I'll get kind of the data points there, and then move to more of a like process strategic kind of oriented thing where maybe it's less of an intake process and more of your regular one-on-ones with frontline managers or whatever, your annual, quarterly, monthly rep surveys that you're getting kind of ideally from kind of the field and you're hearing from what people want. As far as prioritization goes, I had an interesting one where I followed a RevOps method here where it was almost like if anybody's old enough to remember like carbon credits from like the Al Gore days, it was basically this idea of like each department gets a certain amount of like Nina, to your point of like learning kind of like budget or whatever it is. They
Okay.
can wheel and deal between each other, but like sales gets, 10 hours and whatever, like everybody gets 10 hours and then what that looks like. Then it's up to them from a leadership perspective to prioritize their own requests of what's most important to them. Happy to dive into more detail, but Nina, I want to give you a chance to weigh in here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm a big process girly as well. I mean, I taught physics for crying out loud, so if that tells you anything about the way my brain works. So I love a good intake form. I think there's a balance of like asking asking just enough to give you context for a conversation. Like I would never rely on just an intake form to make that decision. Like you still need to have like a proper scoping conversation. Um, but typically I found that the intake form works better for like the other teams, like when legal needs something, when RevOps needs something, when product marketing needs something. For the stakeholders that I serve, for the sales leaders, the CS leaders, I think those like having regular conversations with them to understand what their priorities are is going to be a much better method because I never felt okay about like sending them to an intake form like, hey, can you just fill out the form for me? I would rather just like have that conversation up front. So I think it's a combination of the two on that. So and
Amazing.
then I don't, was there another question? Because I got another one that came in, but I know we're only 2 minutes from
Um,
closing.
yeah,
So
we're right on time, but what we can do is get those questions, and then for the key takeaways, we can also answer them there. But thank you both so much. I was taking notes on the side. I learned so much myself. And thank you all for joining us here on a Wednesday. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. So
all
good to
right,
see y'all.
thanks, y'all.
Thank
It's
you.
great.